Welcome to What on Earth Are You Thinking? First, we would like to acknowledge that we are Mi'kmaq and unceded territory of Mi'kmaq people. The territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. We recognize the significance of these treaties and the need for continual learning and engagement in the work of truth, reconciliation, and equity. We are all treaty people. We also recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched the part of Mi'kmaq known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years. Just a few housekeeping points. For fire exit, it's down to the bottom and down the stairs and out the back. The washroom locations are down the stairs and then down another set of stairs to the right. And there will be a 15-minute break where coffee and tea will be available for $1, but you get free cookies. SCANS is a volunteer-based registered nonprofit organization dedicated to providing affordable, non-credit academic courses to seniors. We have expenses associated with putting on these free public presentations and would welcome donations. The donation jar is located at the desk as you enter. If you would like to receive constant updated information on SCANS and its upcoming courses, we recommend that you do sign up on our mailing list, which can be found on our site, the SCANS website, and just go right to the bottom and you can fill out the information. So on a side note, SCANS needs one more person to sit on its finance committee. All meetings are held in Halifax, but they are Zoomed, so you don't have to travel to Halifax. So if you're interested, please see Fern, who sits out of the desk in front, and she can give you a little bit more information. Today's lecture is being recorded. So at the end of the presentation, if you do have questions, please speak loud so that they can be heard. I would also like to remind you to turn off your phones during the presentation. Now I would like to introduce Peter Welch. Peter was born in the UK and educated at Cambridge University. He has spent his career living and working internationally. Starting as a volunteer in Africa, he went on to lead 4 different international schools in Thailand, Turkey, Finland, and Romania. He has been at the heart of conversations in international schools about how we can teach and learn better using brain research. Peter co-authored the book, Who on Earth Are You? How Do You Thrive in a Mixed Up World? Good question. With his wife, Suzanne. So welcome, Peter. Where are you?
James, good afternoon, everybody. Using my teacher voice. So I'm sorry I use this gag at University School of Arts. I want to do the same thing. I'm a teacher, so to make me feel at home when I say good afternoon, could you say good afternoon, Mr. Welch, in your most bored teenage boy? He's speaking to put people of such a wise age in a room and dim it and listen to a British guy talk for 2 hours. Neurologically, that's a recipe to put you to sleep. So I may pick up on that point. I'd like to try and tune into the audience. So I've done this talk quite a bit. And sometimes I talk to teachers and why they listen to me. They want me to give them solutions to that bonkers 8-year-old who is unmanageable in their class. And sometimes I talk to parents who want me to give them the key codes to understanding their teenager who they just don't know anymore. Right? Looking around the room, look to your left, look to your right. I would say the average age of the audience is about 25, 30. So, I mean, the connections in this talk, I'll try and make personal. But I imagine many of you are very active grandparents. We'll talk a bit about how some of this stuff may help you, or helping your kids raise teenagers, right? You get those phone calls, I'm sure. If, like me, you still wander into rooms and you wonder quite why you came into that room and what was the reason, you keep leaving your specials in the fridge. We may look a little bit about neurologically why that happens and what to do about it. In Gene's kind introduction, I'd like you to please notice the following. Number one, I am not a neuroscientist. I'm not a scientist, not even a social scientist. Before I started leading schools, I was a history teacher, which gives me no qualifications to talk about this subject. Here, my interest and passion in neuroscience and its adaptations came from my work in schools and my fascination with the question about how we make learning better for our students. And when I ask a room of educators, what do we mean by learning? It's a word even school teachers don't pin down very often. And actually we can base learning as a brain-based definition. Learning should change the architecture of our brains. Actually, that's what learning actually is as a brain-based definition. And therefore, we should be super interested in how the brain works as educators. I've led schools all my life. And I'm actually, I think people who teach for a living are amazing people. I'm actually very critical of the way that schools run, of the model of schooling. There are lots of things about the way we teach kids, which is quite dark. Why are we trying to teach teenagers anything at 8 a.m. in the morning? There's no basis in science to show that's a good idea. Why are we running meetings at 4:30 when everyone's exhausted? There's no neurological evidence to show that's a good idea. And so, in this journey to try and answer that question, I've been deeply engaged with an organization called Learning and the Brain, which is out of Harvard and MIT. And it's a conference structure where educators are privileged to sit and listen to neuroscientists actually doing the work in the labs. And I used to go to this conference every year and try to listen to the latest research. But hear me as I present these ideas. Use your own judgment, your own common sense. And I'll say that again and again in this talk. I look the wrong way. Right, let's wake everybody up. I want to give you something to learn. Ready? Got it? You've got 10 things to learn. There's going to be an exam. You can't leave unless you pass the exam. Here we go. 10 random things. Go. Five, four, three, two, one. Got it? Charlie, got it?
Learning and memory, are they two different things?
No. Witnesses. But thank you. What I asked you to do just then was impossible. But it's a lot what schools are asking kids to do every day. Right? And I'll come back to that point. Don't spend the rest of the talk going, John, the answer. Because you would learn stuff, but you wouldn't hear a word I'm saying. Don't worry about that number. It's up there, Ram. I mean, I don't know why that's there, and that might be important later. Okay, so let's establish the basements for the argument we're making this afternoon. I've said that the path is far from straight from a neuroscientist in a lab looking down a microscope, a piece of brain tissue, or an fMRI machine, to a social scientist, to a teacher, to the student. It's a very long road. Why? Number one, the brain is an organ of quite staggering complexity. Really amazing. We have in our heads, all of us, 86 billion neurons. That's brain cell, neuron. 86 billion. And those neurons are connected through something called a synapse in 1 quadrillion ways. How many noughts is a quadrillion? Any math teachers? A quadrillion is this big. Oh, hang on. Quadrillion is that big at the bottom here. It's 15 noughts. Okay? So that's 86 billion neurons connected in approximately, we don't know, but 1 quadrillion connections. So the metaphor is if you look at a starry night and you see the just overwhelming the size in numbers in the universe, there is a parallel if we look inside the human head of that level of extraordinary, unfathomable detail. It really is. Number one, staggering complexity. Number two, field of neuroscience is still quite young. In the 1990s, we could begin to see it working. I'm going to show you those tools in a moment. But it's growing so fast. As I was saying to a friend on the way over, a book I read last year, an amazing neurobiologist called Robert Sapolsky, says in his book, all the research in this book is 5 years old or less. And in a few years' time, all this is going to be outdated. Right? So a lot of our conclusions now are tentative. We're just beginning this journey. Number three, cross-cultural and cross-generational studies are still limited. Right? So when we see a big splashy neuroscience headline, we've discovered this. It may be based on a certain demographic, right? They were Americans between 30 and 40 at this time of day. There were no Chinese, Japanese, Russian, Brazilian, who may actually cognitively be quite different. A lot of scientific study is based on young people who need $50 quickly. Is that a representative sample of human rights? Four, schools are increasingly saying we need to be careful saying that anyone is neurotypical. You see even bumper stickers now saying neurodiversity is a new buzzword. Yeah. We're just on this journey. And number five, we are limited by the tools and what we can see. Ah! Okay. Has anyone here had an fMRI? You've gone on this machine. What were they doing to you when you went in? Do you know?
Looking into my brain to see if there was black spot.
Okay. Okay. Do you know how they were doing?
Not exactly. I was in the machine, not behind the control.
You followed my stuff and said, please get in this machine.
Yes.
They were trying to figure out what part of my brain was doing certain things. So I had earphones on, I had something to cover my eyes, and so I couldn't hear, I couldn't see, and then they let me see what part of my brain blew or showed up at that point, and other things too. So.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, some of you may know this, forgive me, but I want to explain what was happening when you went in and put the headphones on and into this thing. What were they doing? When you go in, this is an incredibly powerful magnet. It's functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, fMRI. It's a hugely powerful magnet, and what that does is it actually communicates with the magnetic centers of your cells and aligns them to the scan. In specific terms, it's picking up oxygenated blood. When any part of our body needs energy or is doing something, it calls for oxygenated blood to power us. So the principle of an fMRI machine is a part of the brain that's working is drawing oxygenated blood. And the fMRI is getting hold of those cells and giving you an image. That's what an fMRI is doing, right? Oh, I keep going backwards. And these machines are now getting super cool. We can see more and more and more. Right? And fMRI scanning, they took this is a news story from this year, you may well have read. They took a 45-year-old woman who suffered from epilepsy, and they took a little piece of her brain and the surgeon to try and help. And they took that piece of brain, which was the size of a square millimeter. That's about half the size of a grain of rice, can you imagine? Right? And they took that square millimeter and they sliced it 5,000 times. And then they scanned it with an fMRI special machine. And what they discovered, they found in that 1 square millimeter 57,000 neurons and 150 million connections in a square millimeter of brain. And these 5,000 slices, which are flat images, were then compiled by Google using 3D model into 3D images, which look like this. That, everybody, is a square millimeter of somebody's brain. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that extraordinary? Remember, these aren't real pictures, they are computer-generated models of scans. And this last one's super cool. So this here is a close-up of a neuron and axons and synapses, but I don't look from your chair because it's a big room. But here you see like big knotted balls of wool, right? And it's actually entirely unknown and mysterious to neuroscientists why. We don't know yet. We've only just begun to see it. And we don't know whether it's because of the neuropathology of a person with epilepsy, because something to do with her brain, sorry, or whether there's a common. We don't know yet. And anyway, whenever you take a fMRI scan of a brain, you are capturing a brain so-called lit up with oxygenated blood. But what does that show anyway? Question. No. What does it show the second before you took the scan? Or the second after you took the scan? Right? I'm going to whiz through this because it's a bit tedious, all the technical terms. You can have a targeted fMRI, which is called transcranial magnetic stimulation, blah blah blah. But it sends a magnetic pulse to a particular part of the brain and gets those cells to react or vibrate. And it's good for people with Alzheimer's or dyslexia or stroke victims. And it tests. And you can't say, are you responding to me? Can you talk to me, right? It's good for very specific diagnostic testing. And this cool image comes from something called diffusion tensor imaging, and it's got magnetized water molecules within white matter, blah, 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 blah. What it shows is the complexity of the signaling across the brain, right? How connected up the brain is.
Are those colors generated?
Those aren't natural, those are put on by the computer model. That's all they are. They're not normal. So I'm sorry for all the blah, 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 but if we wanted a basic inquiry of this, what is the effect of coffee on the brain? Well, it's a fairly simple scientific inquiry. I've just had coffee, thank you, Paul. I'm a bit more awake. But that's our research question. To answer it effectively, you would need a range of age of volunteers drinking different types of coffee at different times of day, right, with different moods, repeated several times to get a robust scientific outcome. And that rarely happens. particularly if the study is paid for by a colleague. Scientific research has that subjectivity. Oh, almost going backwards. So, all that's to say, what we are really at the beginning of a journey in neuroscience of what we know. And on that journey, people who wanted to sell a book or make a name put out a big idea which has taken hold in the public imagination. And these are what are so-called neuro myths. And these may be familiar to you. Who recognizes the idea that some of us are left brain, some of us are right brain, right? You may have said that. You may even self-identify that I'm left brain, I'm analytical and rational. And my cousin's right brain, she's crazy enough. Right? I'm here to tell you that's complete rubbish. There's no such thing. No such thing. There's no such thing. The brain is both hemispheres working all the time together. There's no evidence to show this is true. Multiple intelligence theory. Howard Gardner, very influential book, very, particularly in schools. Right? And it gives us the idea that the brain has sort of different bits of it. Some of it is musical, some visual, some logical, etc., etc. And some people are better at that and less good at other things, maybe because that part of their brain is slightly bigger. That's all rubbish. That's not true. Each of these processes, if you're painting and you did someone, it'd be weird, but if you did, put them in fMRI with a paintbrush, if you did it, you would see that it's a whole brain activity. It's not located on the left or the right one. So it's certainly lighting up the visual cortex, but the visual cortex is in itself a whole brain activity. So this is a neuromyth, doesn't actually have any root in neuroscience whatsoever. It's helpful in schools. We've moved away from IQ and a very narrow definition of intelligence. That's helpful, but this is not neuroscience. Let's have some audience participation before we do. Who thinks, and be clear, I'm not going to name check anybody, who thinks that a male brain is very different from a female brain? Can you raise your hand? In some ways. And who disagrees and say no, there's probably very little. Okay. A few years ago, as a leader, I would give talks on teaching boys and girls differently based on brain-based differences. I've worked in girls' schools, I've worked in boys' schools, I've worked in co-ed schools. And this book, Why Gender Matters, was a sort of Bible for me. This was written in 2005, and everything in it has now been largely disproven. Right? And gender studies of brains are also at an early stage. We've ridden this crazy train. So in the early 2000s, if you were going to conferences, they would talk about a pink brain and a blue brain. Sorry for the gender stereotypes. Sorry for the gender stereotypes. And then more recently, we've gone sort of opposite reaction. There's no such thing as brain-based differences. Okay? That, you know, in certain rooms, you talk about gender being a social construct. And in many ways, an excuse to keep sexist tropes. The idea that women can't park, and men have no emotions, Now, we're coming out the other side of it. And what we know now, which may be disproven in ways like 10 years time, is some of the problem. We seem to think that the male brain is 10% bigger than a woman's brain. Doesn't mean men are 10% or more smarter. It just means the cranium is generally that much bigger. It's all it means. Generally speaking, we seem to see that a female brain is more connected up across the two hemispheres going that direction. Whereas the male brain is a little bit more connected across the brain that way, on average, right? Now, taking steps on to say, if I'm connected across the brain that way, that means I'm going to see this. You're wading into a political nightmare. You really are. You can say, oh, well, that means that men can pop.
Is it true women recuperate from certain strokes better than some men because of the corpus callosum and the connections?
I wouldn't think so, and it would depend on the stroke. Where it is in the brain. Sorry. Do you mind,
No.
unless the question's
Go ahead.
really pertinent for now, I am going to open time for questions, but please, go ahead now.
Well, I was just going to say, is it not true that boys are more likely to be at the extremes of the intelligence spectrum than girls? That there is some evidence that boys, that more boys are likely to be at one end or the other.
Short answer, no. Longer answer is this. Let's take an example. That book makes the argument when teaching math at school gets to a certain level, particularly around calculus, right? It reaches a new level of abstraction. And if you track attainment in math, girls are better at math until you reach calculus, where it requires a new kind of thinking and boys are better. That's the argument in that book. Since that time, people have pushed back and said things like, well, you realize most mathematicians are men. Explain things in a sense, and there are very few role models for success. What I'm trying to say is the interplay between nurture and nature and social conditions is so complex, very hard to make clear statements about how brain differences translate into different behaviors.
Okay.
You okay with that? All right. But scientists who are beginning to say there are differences are getting attacked on social media. Because we're living in an environment where gender is such a hot topic, it's very hard to speak out loud. Because people are so entrenched in their own political position. But, and this is, don't shoot me for this, yes, there are brain-based differences because in utero, when we're being developed in our mother's wombs, our brains are being washed by hormones which are gender-based. So our very brain development is differentiated, right? And that affects the way the brain is set up. All right, I'm going to keep going before I get into more trouble. So, it's a nice phrase which I borrowed from a neuroscientist who presented one of these conferences. Right now, in neuroscience, we have at very best a yellow belt understanding. What that means is we're nowhere near being a black belt. We know enough to get ourselves into trouble, but not enough to win the fight. We need to be humble enough. All right, like a good lawyer, I've established all my get-out clauses, and you can't sue me. Here we go. This is the stuff which I hope we can stand behind. And we're going to do, we've got 10 ideas. We're going to do 5, and then take a break, give yourself a brain break, get a cup of coffee, a cookie, and we'll come back and do the other 5. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a little hard to read because of the graphic, excuse me, but what it says is neuroplasticity, it's a fancy word, neuro, plastic, something that changes shapes. Neuroplasticity is the lifelong ability of the brain to change its organization as a result of experiences, is true. This is true. We have lots and lots of evidence to show this is true. So, we know, we obviously have people in the audience who suffered a stroke. We have lots of evidence that the brain can take that traumatic life instance and grow and repair itself and develop different neural connections to, we hope, compensate for the losses you may get in a stroke. Right? We know that if you lose your sight, that if you learn Braille or other ways of reading the world, you can activate your visual cortex. Did you know when a blind person reads Braille, they're using their visual cortex? Did you know that? Oh, isn't that cool? In a negative sense, if you're a drug addict, sorry, if you're a drug addict and addicted, like if you got addicted to cocaine, which hijacks the pleasure centers of your brain, it will damage your brain. It'll take a long time to withdraw from that and rebuild the dopamine pleasure centers that can give you normal pleasure if you're a drug addict. If you exhibited severe trauma, like you've been in war, you've had post-traumatic stress disorder, that means your brain is over-sensitized to threats. It's over-triggered. Schizophrenia is partly a disorder where your brain is not able to calibrate the level of what's given. Everything comes in at 100 when it could be at 20 or 10. It's like, ah. So you overreact. If you learn a musical instrument, you'll see the part of the brain to do with processing sound thickens. In old language, before Google Maps, all London taxi drivers need to learn the knowledge. The knowledge was every single street in London.
Yeah.
So if someone got in your cab, you knew where to go. That's called the knowledge. So if you put a London cabbie in fMRI, you can see that part of the brain nice and so it changes. When we come out, the big ages of neuroplasticity are from 0 to 18 months. So those experiences are vital. If someone's born into poverty or neglect, the neurological impact may never be recovered. The other big explosion is adolescence. We're going to talk about this, which begins at 11 up to about 24, 25. But all of us, doesn't matter how wise you are, your brain is still changing shape. Your brain is still neuroplastic. This is quite a profound thing to say. Because we used to think we're born this smart with this ability. And then we live through life until they all die out and we become this person. The evidence now shows we're born with this setup from our nature, and we get this nurture, and we have these life experiences, and they change our brain structure profoundly. In other words, the people we are at the start of life are not the people we end life. We can change very fundamental things about ourselves. And the way we describe ourselves is often very self-limiting. My wife's a wonderful artist, and she will have been told 1,000 people, my friends, I'm not an artist. I can't do art. That's not true. It's not true. You may not be good at it easily, but if you work hard and long enough at it, you can become good at art. Your brain is capable of doing that perfectly well. It's just going to be hard. None of us are going to be Usain Bolt. None of us are going to run. But we can get quicker. We can do things. It gets harder as you get older to learn a language for learning. It gets harder because all of us get less elastic in our bones, in our joints, in our thinking. We have less play. We have less collagen in our body. Things get stiffer, but we can still move it. We can. This is a brain scan of someone in their late 60s, and what you see in yellow is neural growth. This person's still making new neural networks. Okay. You will be familiar with the cliche use it or lose it.
Yeah.
As we get a little bit older, it's really important to use it and challenge it, because if we don't, our brain will get rid of it. As I'm going to talk about with teenagers, what the brain is doing all the time is optimizing. Because the brain uses a lot of energy, it uses 20% of our energy. If it feels it doesn't need it, it shuts it down. So if you stop using it, the brain goes, don't need it, cut those things. It's called pruning. Prune those things. So keeping active, keeping using, keep challenging, keep trying, and keep the neuroplasticity of the brain. This is so cool. This came out last week, and something again Suzanne's been passionate about. This shows not a great scan, but it shows a scan of a pregnant woman. Those of you who've been pregnant, sorry fellas, not you. Did you have baby brain, so-called baby brain? Right? You felt you've got a little foggy, a little less sharp. Right? Maybe, maybe not. There is emerging evidence of the reason for that is cognitively our neural resources are so used up by the fact that we're growing a human being inside of us that it redirects cognitive resources away from the prefrontal cortex and other higher order thinking regions. And they're going to find similar things for menopause. If you think of a body has a certain amount of resources and it needs to say, what am I going to spend those resources on? If it's going through big events, like growing a baby or going through menopause, it's going to spend its money on those things and take resources away from other things. What we talk about as parents quite a lot, we have one daughter, Gabby, is when you become a mum, your sense of fear or anticipating danger for your child grows, and you never lose it. And I wonder what that looks like as a brain scan, because I bet you could probably find that happening. If we were talking to educators, but as grandparents and parents, this is a powerful educational idea which does have a basis in neuroscience. In old money, we tended to think with a fixed mindset. Failure is the limit of my abilities. I'm either good at it or I'm not. My abilities are unchanging. We now talk about in schools the so-called growth mindset, the idea that we can, with effort and application, get better at things. And it comes from a thinker called Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck's research put two groups. One group of students used to getting A grades, the smarties of the class. They're given a task. And the first task was easy. Hey, they did it quick. We're smart. Then they were given a harder task, which they really struggled with, and that group gave up quickly because they were used to things being easy. The second control group were your BC students who took longer on the first task but did better because they had learned in life they needed to keep struggling. And so educators are taught to talk more about the effort and the application in the work rather than the outcome or the grade. So if you're parenting or grandparenting, it's called the grandmother effect. The best thing you can say looking over the homework is, I really love the effort you put into that. I really love when you try to do that a different way. That's great. I'm just going to let that sit for a while. In a different talk, I talk about culture and people. Our human experiences when we meet people and put them in a box. My accent triggers for you certain stereotypes about the British and my English accent. And a lot of you are hearing that normally, right? I'm not, but that's what we all do, right? We hear a different accent. We immediately go, you are this person, put you in a box. as much as we can to meet people with a generally open mind, that they can be anything and let people out of boxes is a very powerful, cognitively, neurologically proven thing to do. Who has a teenager still in their house? Anybody here? Oh, good. We have to be politically correct. Okay. Teenagers are tough. Teenagers are tough. We spend a lot of my professional life around. The first thing to say is, as I'm critical of schools, there's no real reason why we send kids to school at age 3 approximately and they go to 18. There's very little evidence to show that why you make those decisions. One of the best systems in the world doesn't start formal education until 7, that's in Finland. Stopping at 18, there's nothing different going on at 18 as there is at 17. Why stop at 18? They're not cooked, everybody. They're still cooking when they go to university. They're not really cooked at adolescence done, which, depending on the individual, somewhere between 23 and 25. And what I mean by cooked is their brain isn't cooked. It's still under construction. There are areas to do with overreaction, anxiety, eye rolling, complaints against injustice, and door slamming are not yet fully developed. Okay. Really, what's going on? A lot in the brain that we're going to simplify. Just put your hand there, on top of your head, here, there. Underneath your hand is your prefrontal cortex, or your PFC, prefrontal cortex. This is one of the last areas of the brain to develop and isn't fully mature until mid-20s, PFC. And that part of the brain is to do with higher reasoning, rational thought, calibration of risk. It's called the CEO of the brain. It asks when you have an opportunity to do something, is that a good idea? For a teenager, it's not cooked. It doesn't have the person kicking in. Is that really such a good idea? It's not ready, it's not done. I had a good buddy, he was a principal, and he used to say, when the kid had done so, I don't know, he'd pull them in for a conversation and say, Mr. Smith, it's like this. Your son's been given the keys to a new Ferrari, but he's only been given half of the instruction manual. So that's forming. And the other thing is all the time, because of sexual maturation and growing up, the teenage brain is being washed by a very powerful and potent cocktail of hormones the whole time. And hormones are the things that cause certain connections in the head. Right? There's more to say. Briefly, the consequences. Teenagers typically, and no teenagers do, there's many people who won't follow this is a stereotype, leads to short-termism and self-orientation. And if you've raised kids and say, why are they so selfish and so self-preoccupied? Which we may have felt. There's a reason that they don't have the ability to perspective think. They don't, generally speaking. If they do bad on a math test and they come home and go, Dad, it's the world I got. Travelers, do it. And you remind me, remember last week you got an A? They don't. They don't have that ability to self-correct. Their world is self-orientation in quite a short moment of time. Risk-seeking, partly because they can't calibrate risks. You know, all the times we just had one, God bless Gabby, she been traveling around Europe, and we fret because we can see all the risks she may be running. She doesn't see them. Great, good. You don't want to that way, but I see them. But it's also the risk reward. How many of you still would love to ride a roller coaster? Most of us, with your forgiveness, would think it's a thing to do. Because the reward we get from doing it at our wise age is very limited. Our feedback in our brains, the pleasure we would get would be probably more fearful than pleasure. But for a teenager, the emotions, the hit, the emotions, the hormones that give us strong feelings, serotonin, are high. The highs is just much higher. The first time you do it, the novelty of doing it is high. It's never the same again as when you're a teenager. First time you fall in love, the first time you have a beer or you do something. The reward system in your brain is at its most acute. So going on a roller coaster will give you a woo! It will, because your brain's set up to give you, to flood you with dopamine. You think, great, let's do that again. When you're 80, I can take caramel tea and I'm off to bed now. Thank you. Self-consciousness. I mean, obviously that's partly brain-based, but sexual maturation, self-awareness, attraction to one another, where do I fit into the social hierarchy? But the highs are high, the lows are lows, emotionally in the brain, that's proven to be true. Feedback loops in the brain are just so much more sharp when I'm a teenager. So peer identification, fitting in, wearing the same clothes, doing the same stupid things, saying the same stupid things are important because standing out is emotionally painful. To be locked out or ridiculed hurts. So we avoid it. When you do a brain scan and you ask a teenager, what do you think of yourself? Or what do other people think of you? The scan looks very similar. People can't separate it out. If you ask an adult the same question, hopefully your identity here in this room is not based on what everyone else thinks. You separated it out a long time ago. But in teenagers, that's not true. It's painful to be teased or whatever. So generally speaking, you don't do it. And lastly, changes in sleep habits. All of us have a circadian rhythm. Some of you will be struggling with your circadian rhythm right now. If you are used to an after lunch nap. But generally, circadian rhythms are driven by a hormone called melatonin, which is released at predictable times in our day and triggers the body to go to sleep. And the science would show try and keep a regular sleep habit because that will keep the production of melatonin consistent and keep you healthy. Right, so whatever time you go to bed, 9ish, the body will go, here's your melatonin. And when you get up in the morning, 6, 7 o'clock, when you do, that melatonin is dissipated and you're waking up, cup of coffee, ready to go. For teenagers, that process happens later. The release of that melatonin as a hormone happens at least an hour later. Did you know that? Interesting. So there's a reason why, again, stereotypes, not every teenager generally, that's the reason why teenagers are awake later and struggle to get up in the morning. So why I say to schools it's stupid to try and teach a 14-year-old anything at 8, because their brain is still washed with melatonin. They're not awake. They're not making a choice. They're not being lazy. They're not throwing attitude. They physically, you're asking them to do something their body doesn't want to do. The teenagers have a bad rep. And I love this reframing by Robert Sapolsky. And for those at the back of the room, I will read it out. Adolescence and early adulthood are the times when someone is most likely to kill, be killed, leave home forever, invent an art form, help overthrow a dictator, devote themselves to the needy, become addicted, marry outside their group, transform science or math, have hideous fashion sense, break their necks recreationally, commit their life to a god, steal from an old lady, be convinced that all of history has converged to make this moment the most consequential, the most fraught with peril and promise, the most demanding that they get involved in. So the magic of teenagers is they don't second guess themselves. Right? They'll jump in. And it's actually rather lovely because adults go, what? Okay. How you doing? You okay? Yeah. All right, just a little bit more than a break. You doing okay? All right. Thank you. Here's the third big idea. Working memory, again, is a pretty well-established neuroscientific category, and it refers to the amount of information our brain can hold at one time. That's our working memory. It's short-term memory, which, if we do it right and we sleep, can filter down and get laid down in the hippocampus and long-term memory. Working memory is what we have right now. And human beings generally, there's a huge range, and there's a debate whether it's nature or nurture, can hold in our head somewhere between 4 and 7 things. If you're extraordinary, sometimes 9. If you're neurologically different, maybe less. A toddler, 1 or 2 things, right? But somewhere between 4 and 7. 37. Okay? And I wonder how technology is eroding that, because we used to hold 20 phone numbers in our head, and now we can't. Because we outsource. I wonder how that's changing. Our working memory easily gets overwhelmed, and it's a very powerful habit in life. Generally, understand that in ourselves and who we love and who we relate to. If you're, as a grandparent, putting your grandchild to bed, and you say the following: Sally, I'd like you to get ready for bed, please. Could you brush your teeth, go put on your pajamas, and pick a book out for Nana to read? Someone said 2 minutes. You're right. You may find Sally in the middle of the room going, what? It's much better for a toddler to say, please go brush your teeth and come back to me. Well done. Could you now go and put on your pajamas and come back to me? Well done. No, good book. Ladies, this works for husbands too. How many do you remember? Now, regarding talk, no, it was 55 minutes ago. No, you got the information about 50 minutes ago. If you remembered all 10, you are remarkable when you wrote it down. Most of you would have forgotten it. Most of it. These were them. I won't test you.
37.
I see that. So I've chose 10 because it's beyond our capacity to hold that in our working memory, particularly when I'm talking at you for the next 50 minutes. I gave you an impossible task. Yes? Yeah. If I chunked it, I would have made it easier if I'd done this. John Lennon wrote I Am the Walrus in 1967 based on a poem by Lewis Carroll. Beyonce was born on 4th of September 91 in Houston. She recently had a #1 hit with Texas Hold'em. I may have given you a better chance to remember it. Because I gave you hooks and a story and a narrative. Right? We remember stories, we remember connections. People who can memorize playing cards very quickly, weave them into a story to allow it to embed in the brain. It is sad to know that typically the forgetting curve is savage. Right? When you get input, you lose most of it very quickly. 20 minutes, 1 hour. After an hour, you have 44% left. 1 day, 33% left. 6 days, 25% left. So I'm here to tell you, scans, I appreciate the invitation. It isn't a terrible way people learn. You may remember colourful stories or things that made a direct emotional connection to your life in this lecture, because they went in deeper into your brain. But if the bunch of facts that I gave you, most of it will go away unless you repeat it or record it and say it back to you. It's a very sad fact, right? That's why I'm critical of schools, because if we do 40 minutes of biology on Tuesday and we don't do any more biology till a week on Thursday, that's a terrible way to learn. That's how schools do it, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. When I worked in international schools, I would often, and again, apologies for the stereotype, but a lot of Asian cultures like children to keep learning and learning, and after school keep learning and learning and learning, and more tutors and all that. And I'd say to the Asian parents, stop it, please, we're not helping the child, they need to sleep. Because if you want them to learn, the brain needs to sleep, have time to move it from working memory down to the hippocampus. When we sleep, several things happen. One of them is you get a cleanup team, come in with the vacuums, hoovering up, experiencing the day you don't need, cleans it up, right? Actually flushes it out of the system. And it also goes, oh, that was interesting, that fits there, that fits there. It sort of has time to grow your neural networks. And if you don't get that sleep, all you get is stuff hanging around in the brain, unsorted out. So sleep is homework. As is daydreaming. Stereotypically, that boy who's doing this, he's actually, his brain is working, he's storing stuff, he's sorting it out. He may feel like all that. Daydreaming is actually a very helpful cognitive thing to do. This is the last one for the break, I think. Yes. Appropriate. It's hard to pay attention, folks. Teachers out. They're asking you to do 3 different things. 1, to be alert. And to be alert is to be physiologically able to hear. It means you need to be well rested, you need to be well prepared. You need to be not too hot, you need to have enough light.
And where are your hearing aids?
And where are your hearing aids? Yes. And if those are not true, then you're not, that's the first level of being able to pay attention. We'll talk about how our brain's different at different times of day. And I'll tell this story now because it's cool to tell it now. If you have a parole board, like a group of judges deciding whether prisoners should be set free, the worst time to come before a parole board is before lunch. And they can track the decisions they make. You're something like 20% less likely to get parole before lunch. Focus is you're able to concentrate on what's being said to you. I am so grateful to the SCANS team. I've never walked into a room where I'm not fiddling with the wires or getting anxious. I walked in with this setup and video. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The space, being able to pay a focus. This is not a great teaching space. You're in rows. Some of you can't hear me too well. We've got no lights. This is not a great teaching space. In your own learning, pay attention to that. I talk to teachers the whole time because if you go into an early childhood classroom, it's full of crap. There's things to notice everywhere. And if I'm a 3-year-old boy with ADHD, I'm making it really tough for that little boy to pay attention to my teacher. If you want someone to pay attention, take him to a calm, white space where there's nothing in it. Helps them. Ladies, this works for husbands too. Lastly, engagement. Yeah, briefly. I mean, engage, you know that we like listening to stories. Well, we don't understand why, but if you scan someone listening to a story, we activate some ancient neural network, blah, blah, blah. We activate some neural network where a narrative or a story somehow hooks into us. better than other ways of communication. Maybe it does come from being in a cave and telling stories out of art. But it works. And the more you can make an emotional connection, make it visual and real, and people can see it, the better. I think we'll take a break now because I've been talking at you for a long, long time. We've got 6 to do, but they're less intense parts of the talk. Appreciate you listening. Thank you. We'll take a 15-minute break. Can we start again? 4:02. Thanks, everybody. I hope you had a good break.
Yeah.
Nice conversations during the break. A gentleman called Jeff came up and talked to me about his experience with his son. So it reminded me to say in the teenage part, I like to share this with the audiences when I can. It's the most brilliant piece of advice I got early in my teaching career is when you're dealing with teenagers, treat them like adults, but forgive them like children. It's really nice. So I pass that on. And what Jeff said reminded me of that. Okay. So we've got 6 ideas left on the table. I am mindful that it's exhausting to listen to something so long. So we'll move through these quickly. The 5th idea then, this afternoon, is there such a good thing as bad stress and good stress? So if you don't have enough brain activity, you're not stimulated enough, you can become bored, and that can lead to listlessness and apathy and all those kind of things. So if we reach an age of retirement, being active, getting out there, doing stuff is important. Because if you're not, the brain will go use it or lose it, and it'll do its pruning efficiency thing. But if we have eustress in the middle, then we have the right amount of demands. We have enough coming out, we feel competent and we can cope. But as soon as what's coming at us is too much, too threatening, so on and so forth, and we get distress, then we have a cognitive reaction. Our brain becomes overwhelmed, and it kicks into something that you know called fight or flight, right? And it's really good that we understand what's happening with our thinking in those moments. So in moments in your day when you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're dealing with a friend or a family member who is in distress, stressed, they're not able to think clearly. Because, and there's a lot of text, so I am going to read it to you because I like the slide, but it's very small. The body, let's do this, get rid of it. The body under threat, like now, will redistribute resources to deal with the threat, right? Essentially, a long time ago when we were threatened by wild animals that would kill us, that evolutionarily learned response is still with us today and is over-exaggerated. So fight or flight is when we think we're being attacked or overwhelmed, our body redistributes to run away or fight. It sends resources to those areas. And this slide shows that. So if you're feeling anxious, the butterflies in your stomach, felt in the stomach as blood is diverted away from your digestive system, right? Right now, it's not a priority to digest our food. We need to send that blood where? Legs, muscles, heart, because we're getting ready to run or fight. That's why you feel butterflies. Your breathing gets quicker and heavier to take extra oxygen to power legs to run. And so if you feel breathless, you're trying to get more oxygen to the body. The digestive system shuts down to create more energy for running. This makes the mouth go dry and causes a loss of appetite. The brain focuses on the perceived danger and thoughts begin to race as we prepare to make decisions. Extra oxygen produced for running makes the head feel dizzy. Vision gets sharper to look for signs of danger. The heart beats faster to send blood to the leg muscles. Adrenal glands release adrenaline to get body ready to respond to danger. All right. So we don't need the prefrontal cortex. Take oxygen away from there. We're not going to reproduce. Take oxygen away from there. Send it to the hands, the legs, the heart. Let's go. So if you're talking to someone under stress, they can't hear you. They can't reason with you. They can't think. So then what we learn normally through the course of life is getting someone to calm down before we talk is based on real cognitive response. So in a school setting, if a child does not feel safe or is being bullied or feel the teacher doesn't like them and they're constantly under stress, they don't learn much. So when I recruit teachers, I ask them nicely, in a more subtle way, do you like children? Because the teachers who don't aren't good teachers. Okay, this we know to be true. Yeah, and technology is addicting. I'm sure you know why. I'm going to go quickly through this, but our phones give it a whole set of alerts and dings and blah and bloops and blah and bloops and bloops. These trigger a dopamine response in the brain, which is our pleasure center, which is an addictive sensation, same as taking any kind of drug. Right. So Silicon Valley has deliberately designed you to become addicted to your technology. The games you play, the social media that you absorb, keeps you coming back for more because it gives you cognitive feedback that makes you an addict. Someone asked me, should we take phones away from kids at schools? And I said,
You should take those phones away.
you should take the phones away. It's complex. I believe always in talking to young people and building buy-in and respect. I don't think it should be an authoritarian decision. And the evidence is massive on the social impact and their ability to learn of having a device. Researchers, even if you can see your phone and you're conscious, if you've got it in your pocket and it's buzzing because you've got it on silent, part of your attention is on the phone right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 7. Obviously, again, perfectly obvious. Who are you on night owls? Stay up late, feel good, your brain turns on then. And who of you are morning larks? Does that make sense with our demographic? Yeah. The more we can be attuned to how our brain is operating at different times of day, the better we are at life, generally speaking. There are things we should try and put in at different times of day because we'll be better at them. The brain is much able to take on complexity, stress in the morning, generally speaking. So if you've got tough things to do, the idea of swallowing the toad or the frog first thing is based in cognitive science. It's really hard to do at night. We have a limited amount of cognitive resources. It gets used up during the day. Compassion fatigue is real. Our ability to care for other people and exercise empathy and be there gets used up. If someone offers you a chocolate cookie at 10 o'clock, you can go, no, thank you, I'm on a diet. I offer you that cookie at 8 p.m. Oh, okay. Yeah? Anyone recognize that in themselves? Our ability to self-regulate is good in the morning, less good at night. So we don't, let's stay up here. Yeah, sorry. And in our professional lives, we make a lot of crazy decisions about when we schedule things. Okay. So as much as we have control of our own life and our own schedule, if you've got heavy lifting intellectual programming early in the day, when you're well fed, you can pay attention. Interestingly, because the body temperature tends to rise through the day, we can do things like math later in the day because we have less mental clutter. We get up with quite a lot of this, a lot of thoughts. The brain's very active. Later in the day, our brain's working less well, but it's less busy. So a highly focused single task may be quite good in the evenings. We're probably pretty good at it. And I believe education generally We are paying more attention to our cognitive health. Cognitive innovations being trying new things, challenging our brain, pushing it, managing the stress. We know physical activity absolutely boosts our brain performance, sleep, and what we eat. These zones of cognitive health, obviously super important. If you've ever tried to teach grade 3 after lunch, if they've been given cookies and Coke, yeah. We talked about neuromyths and metaphors, and often these help you. They may not be perfect, but they get at an idea which helps understand it. Kahneman's idea of thinking fast and slow. Anyone read that book? Yeah. It does have some cognitive truth to it. We do in a brain, when we're asked to think about something, have a fast reaction, a gut response. And that's based on framing what we are given very quickly in terms of previous experience. We spend a whole day, because the world's really complex, we need to say, well, you remind me of this, and this situation's like this, and I put you in this box, okay, well, this is what I think. Right? When we find it's called experience. And that experience can be good and sometimes quite wrong as the world changes. And then we have a slower rational system. If we sleep on the problem, we don't respond to that email, then other parts of ourselves kick in. Right? Because that immediate, I need to frame, this is a quote here. My own field, pattern recognition, is a fundamental capability of the human brain. We can't think fast enough to logically analyze situations quickly, so we rely on our powers of pattern recognition. It's what we do. And sometimes that works, but if it doesn't fit the pattern or it's wrong, you need to give your system time to think a little bit differently. Be nimble. Can you shout out, as an audience, a prime number between 0 and 50?
37.
What was the number? What was the number you were thinking of?
Who, me?
Yes.
37.
Thank you. What answer could it be? You said 23. What talk were you listening? I tried.
By 23 was shown into goals.
Yeah.
I tried unsuccessfully to prime all of you with the number 37 because you saw it. Right now, your brain is taking in all sorts of information, and the statistics are not perfect, but part of your brain is listening to me, part of it, and part of it's listening to outside. Whether you're conscious or not, you're listening to traffic noise, air conditioning, part of it's on the phone, part of it's what are you going to eat tonight, has your friend got home, you haven't heard, you've got a whole narrative of other things going on in your life. And you're taking in information all the time, which is priming you. I put up the number 37 in the hope and expectation when I asked you for a prime number, that's what you would come up. This is what advertisers do to you. This is what politicians do. They put in messages without you noticing to get you to manipulate you to thinking a certain way. The practical application of this is, if you want to go on holiday to Paris, works for husbands too. Start leaving a few Parisian-based things subtly around. Because if it gets to the, I want to go to Paris, I want to go to Italy, you won't win. But if you subtly prime Paris, baguettes, where should we go on holiday? Central human truth is this. Right. Suzanne and I were lucky to move to the South Shore. We've seen a lot of the world, but we noticed how kind the culture is of the South Shore. It's actually really quite unusual. The way people deal with each other here, Not everyone, there are idiots here, so we're on the phone. But generally speaking, people are very kind and decent in the way they deal with each other. And that's a self-reinforcing concept. Right? If you offer kindness, it reinforces and people will reflect it back to you. This slide is really for a teaching audience. When I say to teachers, it's important that you like your students and demonstrate that you prime and tell them you like them. And you continue to give them messages about who they are and the kind of people they are. Right? So a school that has a certain set of values, or an organization or a company, having them around the world and on the wall, it's not just glossy marketing, it actually goes in and reinforces all the time. Okay, last two. This scientific research, I think, is still very, very early. But it's interesting that we've been talking, stay up here, we've been thinking that we've been talking, and I've been pointing at my head as being the center of our neural activity. Our neural network actually extends through different parts of our body. We have neurons in other parts. Did you know we have millions of neurons in our stomach? Yeah. Thinking with your gut. Yeah. And your gut is not going to be or not to be. It's thinking, I'd like a chocolate bar. It doesn't have to, this is not doing deep, profound thinking. But it's incredibly influential in how it interacts through the vagus nerve, about what it actually has a great influence. We have more neurons down here than a cat has in its brain. You can tell your cat that later. We also have neurons in our heart. We have 40,000 neurons in our heart. What are they doing? They're pumping blood. Yeah. But also, this is really nice. I like this. I'm probably rubbish, but I'll say it anyway. This talks through the vagus nerve up to the pituitary gland, which is responsible for releasing hormones, and it releases the hormone oxytocin, which is the hormone we associate with the emotion love. Isn't that nice? So when your heart feels sore, or whether it feels full, maybe there's some science there. We don't know, but it's nice to think there may be. The last thing I'm going to talk about today, then, and this is fascinating, is the brain connections culturally are very, very different. People from different cultures see and experience the world entirely different. If you put a Chinese person in an fMRI machine and show them a picture of religion or violence or sex or nature or whatever, their brain will map differently than someone from Canada. The brain's working differently. Isn't that amazing? So when we talk about neurological research, and I say a lot of the studies are your American undergraduates who needs $50. The study is very few are cross-cultural. They've taken a Chinese person, an Asian, Japanese person, Brazilian, and tested these theories cross-culturally. That's still a long journey ahead of us.
Excuse me, does the East Asian who has maybe moved to another culture, say moved to North America, is he still aging as an East Asian or influenced by other Western cultures?
It's a great question. Can I answer that in just one moment?
Yes.
I will answer that. Thank you. So at the front here was, if I grow up with one culture but move to another, how will that change my brain working in my brain? Okay, let me come to that question in a second. Here we're looking at a fish tank, right? There's a wonderful book which was hugely influential. I read 15, 20 years ago by Richard Nisbet, who's an academic out of Michigan, it was called The Geography of Thought. And his research came out of an encounter with a Chinese research student who said to him gnomically, mysteriously, do you know that you think of the world as a straight line, and I think of it as a circle? And Nisbet went, oh, what do you mean by that? And it set him on a research journey to explore the thinking and communication habits of Asian people versus Westerners. And now those categories are problematic, but those are the categories that he had. And what Nisbet discovered is that Westerners experience the world very much through individual thought and action. I, me, mine, myself, I agency, right? We're highly individualistic thinking and acting people, coming from the Greek tradition of I think, therefore I am, through Descartes, through American Revolution, French Revolution, Western politics, right? It's all about individualism, individual rights. It's how our school systems are set up. So an American describing this fish might say, oh, I see a big fish here. Fish. Looks like the fish in Finding Dory. Right? In other words, the American will look at the world through a narrowly focused individual object lens. They'll pick out things of importance to them. Whereas a Japanese person grows up in a more of a collective tradition, when your individuality pays attention to where you fit in the social group. And your I is a blend with the we. I am because we are, right? You have more of a collective view. And so you see the world with a wide-angled lens. You ask a Japanese person to describe a fish tank, and they will say, I see a fish tank full of many beautiful fish. That fish tank looks like it's really well taken care of by the family. The example we wrote in our book is of a Western teenager coming into a party. And the teenager rushing in and go, hey, I won't leave, sorry. It's Dave. I'm going to Dave, because I've seen Dave and Dave's important. I want to go and say hi to Dave. Whereas the Japanese teacher will stand on the edge of the party and look at the whole room and say, okay, who's important to talk to here? How do I fit into this wider group? Then step in. Okay. This individuation and collective view of the world is profound in so many ways, but it is mirrored in the cognitive science. And a lot of my work in schools has been around how we teach intelligently to cultural differences. That if someone comes from Indonesia into an international school, and the teacher goes, Yumi, in a history class, what do you think about the Vietnam War? Yumi will go, look, why are you asking my individual opinion? You're the teacher. And so on and so forth. Now, you asked, great question, does this change over time? And I think, yes, it does. And this, I think it's a nice way to wrap up the whole talk about the interaction between our nature, the DNA we came out with, the cultural circumstances, and how neuroplasticity allows us to become very different people. And I'm not quite answering your question, but I'm going to give you a silly story, if I may. Suzanne and I worked in Ghana and West Africa, in quite tough areas in rural poverty. And in those areas, when you get on a bus, it may say this is leaving at 9 a.m. Does it leave at 9 a.m.? No. It leaves when absolutely every single square inch is rammed full with everything, including several pissed off chickens. Then we can go. When we arrived in Ghana, our cultural response was after we're there for a few months, we're able to get on the bus and read a book and bend. Okay? Which demonstrates, I believe, the human being's capacity to adapt to environment pretty quick. And when we came home again to England and Canada, when our friend was 5 minutes late at the pub, we went back to, come on, you said it. And the evidence shows that we're under stress, our underneath deeper wiring comes to the front. So we can learn superficial experiences in response to experience, but our deeper natural programming is our most authentic selves, unfortunately. Okay. Thank you for the question. Did I answer it sort of? Okay. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I was asked to offer question and answer. I want to say, in offering that, you heard I'm not a neuroscience, I'm not a science. And if you ask me a question I don't know, I'm going to say I'm sorry I don't know. But that said, if anything I've said is interested and you have a further question, please, I welcome your questions. Please, yes.
How do the indigenous people in this country fit in? Do they think more like Asians or Westerners or whatever?
So the question was, how do the indigenous people of Canada fit in? Do they think more like Westerners or Asian people? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, and I would imagine indigenous cultures, from my very limited understanding, are more collectively based than individually orientated. I would think, because the way these communities have thrived throughout centuries, often in very harsh environments, have needed large-scale cooperation. Right? The deeper theory for why individuality versus collectivism developed was about the cultivation of rice, which is a very collective endeavor. You need lots of people, versus Western agriculture, particularly wheat and raising small animals, which can be done by a family. So I imagine the indigenous ways of living, of which there are many in Canada and North America, probably tended towards collectivism. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes.
There's a lot of literature coming out now with the reconciliation stuff and whatever, where they talk about the laws in our country and how differently the Inuit and Native peoples think about the laws and what conflict occurs. So that's an amazing question, because the Native people do think very differently.
I think what we understand, and these are big broader, the idea of ownership, and one person has a piece of land or a house, it's mine, that doesn't belong, I think is a very Western concept in of itself, I think. Yeah. Yes, please.
There's been maybe controversial statements about the effects of alcohol on the brain and what's the safe, level of drinking, and often there is talk about the brain cells that are killed, and as opposed to the social benefits of drinking and how much time it might take off your life. So I don't know. I don't know if there's any right answer. I mean, except that I guess any amount carries risk and harm. But with all the billions of cells that we have, I'm scared.
Yeah, we could kill us. We got 86 billion. We can lose a few, right? Yeah, I think in the way you've answered it, you recognise the complexity of your question. And again, I hesitate to claim any authority on that issue. And again, so I imagine that, right? I think you said both things. Yes, we can see medical evidence that alcohol consumption, particularly in excess, will damage neural circuits. That seems to be well proven. And the consumption of alcohol does actually relax you in a certain way and give you clear social benefits, which will help you neurologically. And I suppose where the line you've implied in the way you've put the question, it's the overconsumption. It's doing too much, right? The sad truth as we get older, moderation in all things, which is a very unsexy, unsatisfying answer, but it does seem to have truth in our health and in our brain health as well. Is that okay? Yeah. Yes.
Just wondering if we should be teaching the teenagers. This is the way teenagers are, that you are going to be more wanting to take risks and all of these things you were talking about teenagers. Would it be better to make them aware of that so they can be cognizant and say, well, maybe I shouldn't do that?
Honestly, I've given this talk to teenagers. The self-awareness they take from the talks doesn't show they change very much. They're not wired, no. Not really wired to hear. No, nor did we. That's always good to say. Yeah. Again, the best piece of parenting advice is if you get into trouble or take stupid risks, call me. I will not turn out with judgment. I will just pick you up safe. There won't be questions. That's the best piece of parenting advice because we did it too. Yeah. There was a question in the middle. Yeah. Yes, please. So in the yellow jacket.
Ideas from mindfulness and meditation.
Again, not for a point. I mean, I've tried meditation in my life. I learned a lot from living in a Buddhist culture in Thailand, where obviously meditation is a heart of spiritual practice. And I think, as you understand, the medical and health benefits of meditation in releasing stress are good. And from a learning, provide focus. Being able to focus on one single thing is incredibly beneficial. A lot of schools, it takes on the word mindfulness or well-being. A lot of schools are putting it at the heart of the curriculum and provide quiet and undemanding time at the beginning or the middle of the day. The research would show educationally, not neuroscience, where I can't really comment with expertise, the benefits are great. They really are. If you continue this practice, you get better focus, you have better health, better well-being. But I don't think my answer's added anything to what you already know, I'm sure. But do you have a follow-up question?
What are you thinking? Sorry, how are you thinking rather than what are you thinking?
Yes. So if you put on an fMRI machine, if they could, and what they were meditating, there are very few studies that would show like an image of what a brain does when it's at rest in that way. That science, to my knowledge, is not there yet. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Kate?
Word about any newer research for people who want to either get rid of an old habit or develop a new habit. That's not an easy thing to do. I was wondering if there's anything new.
Take my way into that question is around technology because it's such a hot topic. We have so many habits around phones now. It's why we're so hard to move away. We keep going back to the devices because it does so many things for us. So that interaction with the phone becomes so normalized. It's so hard to stop us doing. How many of you watch a TV show which you are enjoying and absorbed in and still pick up your phone? It's crazy, right? So we're doing it so much. Our brain is into the habit of needing to do that and check in. I would offer, again, with no expertise, that the only way to break a habit, if that's the heart of your question, is cold turkey. Like breaking a drug addiction or smoking, I think it's very hard to cut down. I will look at my phone less. I think you've got the phone away or put the cigarette packet away or don't buy a bottle of alcohol. I don't think the brain recognizes less. I think it's got an on or off switch around some of those habits. I would think. Yes, sir.
You mentioned short-term memory. Typically, people remember 4 to 7 items of a list of, say, 10. Is there anything that people can do in terms of exercises, processes, that type of thing to improve that? And if it's something that you can improve, but would be great if you stop performing those exercises quickly?
Good question. I think habits of mentalization, mental tasks, keep practicing, does keep those neural networks active and limber. So, we all learn to do Wordle and crossword and, spelling bee in the New York Times, right? And I think those are actually do keep us a bit limber because we're using those networks. Could you, I don't think I've really answered, but could you pitch it again so I can actually answer your question?
Well, I was questioning if you stop doing them, that you sort of regress back to where you were before, or is it something that once you've done them, it sort of maintains itself going forward?
The evidence will show they degrade over time. You start losing those habits if you don't use them.
So keep doing it.
Yes.
Okay.
So let me make that concrete. If you learned French as a young person and practiced it and became fluently bilingual, if you try to retrieve your French because you went to France when you were 60, you'd find a lot of it's there, but it's really rusty. But if you spent a few days and weeks, it would come back quite fast because that learning in the 20s is pretty deeply embedded in your brain. If you tried to learn German at age 65 and then didn't do it for a year and then went to Germany age 67, you'd have very little of it left. So the stage of life and the rich encoding is deeper when you're younger, and it stays in less firmly the older we get. Did that answer your question? Yes, sort of.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience. Yeah, please, sir.
Legal reach for marijuana use. You said in Northern Bermuda.
Yeah. So if you put together an addictive substance which alters the brain chemistry to a person who can't calibrate risks, I think you've answered your own question.
Yes. Yeah. So why weren't more people like you speaking up?
Well, you can say the same for alcohol. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, this presentation has been recorded and it will be available on the SCANS website by tomorrow, including the slides at www.thescans.org. And I would really like to thank Peter for a thought-provoking presentation. I think it was very interesting for all.